Welcome to Mission 150, the podcast that tells stories from 150 years of Seventh-day Adventist mission to the world.
To find out more about the mission of the Adventist Church today, go to adventistmission.org. That's adventistmission.org.
We are so glad that you joined us. I'm Sam Neves.
And I'm David Trim. In this episode, we're joined again by a special guest to talk about their service as a missionary. Today, we're joined by Mildred Castillo, Associate Director of the Institute of World Mission. Millie, welcome to Mission 150.
Thank you for having me.
You have worked in foreign countries for 18 years, living in 7 different countries on 3 different continents. Tell us where it all started. Where did you grow up, and was there any history of mission service in your family?
Yes, well, I grew up in Mexico. My father is a pastor. And of course, as a pastor's family, we moved around when I was a child. He served in many different ministries in Mexico. He served in the youth department, communication department, Sabbath school department. In fact, when I was born, he was away at a youth camp.
Oh my!
And so
And
he
your mother
came.
never let him forget it.
That's right. He came 10 days after I was born to
10
meet
days.
me because he was busy at camp.
Oh dear.
So I grew up moving a lot and serving the church. We always saw it as a part of our family. You know, we serve the church. And on my mother's side, she's a 3rd-generation Adventist, which makes me a 4th-generation Adventist. She came from Colombia. She's Colombian. She came to Montemorelos University study in Mexico. I think secretly she wanted to marry a pastor. That's why she came, because she always said that her dream was to marry a pastor.
And she did.
And she did, yes. And she served in ministry for all those years when my father was serving as a pastor as well. Also, when we were in Mexico City, my father was the first union secretary back in the day when Mexico had just one union. That was around 1977, sorry. And then he served there for 8 years, and then we were called to work in Montemorelos University. My father was a faculty member in the theology department, and my mom worked in the education department. Later, she was the dean of education at Montemorelos University, and my father was the director of the E.G. White Estate, the Ellen G. White Estate branch in Montemorelos, and that's what he was doing when he retired back in 2004. So my life has been very much in tune with mission, although never as cross-cultural mission, but mission nonetheless. Yes.
And you yourself went and studied at Montemorelos University.
That's right, yes. When our family moved to Montemorelos, I was about to start college, and I studied a BA in music education. That's where I met my husband, and we got married in Montemorelos University.
Okay, so did you finish that degree?
I sure did. I finished that degree, and I served in the Montemorelos University music faculty for a couple of years. And then I was a stay-at-home mom and teaching. I had 30 piano students and stayed with my girls at home. And I enjoyed that very much.
Very good. Okay. When does the international mission start then?
Yes, 1998. One evening, my husband came home and told me that he had received a call, but this was actually a phone call. Okay, so I always tell people that I was called to mission by a phone call. It was an actual phone call. Before that, I had never thought about being a missionary. Not because I didn't want to. I grew up listening to the stories, and my father, being in the E.G. White Estate, I heard him tell so many interesting stories that really touched my heart. I always admire the way the pioneers sacrificed for our church But I never thought I was going to be a missionary until that evening that he came home and he said, I got a call and they are inviting me to go to Russia to serve in the Source of Life Publishing House in the Euro-Asia division as general manager. And that was the first time I thought about going to a different country to serve.
How did it feel?
Confused. Before that,
You were
I knew
conflicted?
I was because although I knew I wanted to serve God, I didn't know anything else. I didn't know if I wanted to go so far away. Plus, I had 2 little girls, ages 4 and 2. My mother and my father both were living close by, so I didn't know if I wanted to go that far away to serve. But I really love my church, and I knew that if I ever was asked to serve in any capacity, I wouldn't say no. So
It's a dangerous philosophy.
it is a dangerous philosophy, let me tell you, but the Lord has blessed me so much
I'm sure.
because of that. So I said, well, if the church needs us, then I guess we need to go. And we went, yes.
So, Millie, you and your family then had to make the transition from Mexico to Russia, a
Yes.
very different culture and society. How did you and your husband find that transition? Was it difficult? And I guess it would have been easier for your little children because they were so small, but how did they adjust to a new culture?
Yeah, the transition was a difficult one, yes. It started with the language. We went to study for 6 weeks in California, okay? We went to study. Back then, we were sent for 6 weeks to study Russian. And that was 8 hours a day. So when we came back home, we were confused. We didn't know if we were learning anything. But we finished that, and then we went to Mission Institute in Newell. That was another 4 weeks. So it was a lot of studying and getting prepared for that. That's where the transition started for me, because life took a 180 change. And from there, from Mission Institute, we went to Russia. And we got there in a beautiful summer day. It was August. And we went to buy some fruits at the market. And that's when we questioned whether we had been learning Russian or not, because we thought we had. And then when we tried to speak and they spoke back so fast, we didn't know if it was. But after a few days, it all came back and it became easier. And, the first days are always exciting when you're in a new place.
Yes.
But then the first day of winter came.
Oh, no.
And it started snowing. And
In Russia.
In Russia, yes.
In August.
Well, that was actually September, end
It
of
was September,
September,
it was
yes. So
September,
we
yes.
had a month of getting used to the weather and being excited. But when winter started, that's when the hard part of the transition started for me. My husband went, of course, to work, and he was learning, and he was interacting with people while I was staying at home during winter.
Does it snow in Montemorelos at all?
Never.
Never. Okay.
Never.
When?
So,
Never.
never, yes. So we went there. It was the first time we saw snow, and we were excited, and the girls were playing. And
How old were they again?
They were 4 and 2.
Okay.
And they were playing, and one person came by and saw us, and he said, just wait 1 week. And sure enough, after 1 week, we were already tired and wondering, okay, when will this be over? It snowed
April.
yes, exactly. April, beginning of May, that's when the snow ended. So the transition was hard for me in that sense. I was at home, I wasn't having much social interaction. My husband was, plus the language. We knew basic Russian. Then we decided maybe we would send our girls to school. We wanted them to learn the language so they would have an easier time. And we did that, and that was when it all changed. We started learning, and I was helping them. And
your children would have, their first language probably became Russian, because that's what they were speaking at school.
That's right, yes. There were times when I would come to the room and they were speaking Russian among themselves. So it was something.
How did that feel?
We tried to, of course, at home we always spoke Spanish, so we always try to tell them, remember, this is our language, don't forget. But their schooling was in Russian, so they could just speak Spanish and read, but not write. So that was also hard for them when they went back to Mexico. They could speak the language, but they weren't, they were not schooled in Spanish. So that was hard. Yes.
You stayed for 5 years.
We did.
When did you start, and did you start at some point in those 5 years feeling like you had adapted to Russia?
Yes.
How long did it take?
Probably after 2.5 years, I was
Took
pretty
that long?
much, yes, very long. But I was feeling, we made friends, once you know the language,
Yes.
you make friends, you become part of the daily life of community there. So my girls were going to school, they had their friends, we were very happy. So after 5 years, we felt like we were going to stay there for many more years.
But you didn't.
We didn't.
What happened?
My husband was called to work in Armenia. He was going to be the global mission director for the Armenian mission. And when he told me that, I didn't want to go. I didn't want to leave Russia. I had friends. My life was there. My girls' lives were there. They were studying violin in the Russian School of Music. So I was very proud and very happy. So I didn't want to move. But we thought, let's just put it before the Lord, and if it is His will, He will put it in our hearts. That's what I was waiting for, so that I would feel that it's okay. Let's go and try. And we prayed and prayed, and one morning we woke up, and he said, "You know what? I'm feeling that I think we need to accept this." And I said, "You know what? I think so. let's take this." And we moved to Armenia. And
your husband was global mission director.
Yes.
Were you just still a stay-at-home mum, or did you start to take on a role as well in Armenia?
Very good question. When I came to Armenia, I started working for the Armenian mission with children's ministries and women's ministries and youth ministries.
And any others?
The list is growing.
And we were pretty much part of the life of the church. We would come to church and open the church and have Sabbath school. I was the pianist, and we would have the youth program in the afternoons. So I realized that all those 5 years in Russia, God was preparing us for Armenia. Because I didn't serve the church as much as I did when I came to Armenia, because I already knew the language. We knew the culture, and yes, the culture was a little different, of course. It's another country, but being part of the ex-Soviet Union,
they speak Russian.
They speak Russian,
Okay.
so we didn't have a problem with Russian. We could start ministries, and we started a Pathfinder club, and we were very much involved. So that's when I learned that God had been preparing me all this time so I could work in Armenia, and we had a very exciting service in Armenia, especially with children's ministries. We had BVS for like 1,000 kids, and we would go through different. Yes,
Wow.
we would go through different regions in Armenia for 1 week, 2 weeks. By then, our daughters were preteens, so they would participate in all the programs, and our family just served there so much, all of us.
The way that you described your upbringing, you grew up with parents that had a very practical focus, but also a very academic focus.
Yes.
You described them as the head of the white estate and the dean of education.
That's right.
That means they were prone to abstract thinking, observing patterns and figuring things out, and then, because they were so practical in their ministry, making that a reality.
Yes.
I'm sure you developed that skill throughout your upbringing. It rubs off on you, because
think
those are the
so.
kinds of conversations you have at home. Did that help you as a missionary to quickly adapt and notice patterns in a new culture and then respond to them in a practical way? Because you don't get to 1,000 kids VBS in Armenia without that combination of figuring out the patterns through the Holy Spirit and then coming up with a plan of implementation?
Yes. I think two things. One is, yes, my upbringing. My mom is a teacher, so I always saw her preparing curriculum programs, and I enjoyed that very much. I really like that. But also, my mom being from Colombia, I grew up with two cultures, even though it's two Latin American cultures.
But they're different.
They're different. They're different. So when I grew up, I already knew that there was a different way of doing things.
There was such a thing as culture.
As culture, yes, and different ways of thinking and different ways of presenting things, so that we would adapt what we had to the new setting. So I think that helped me to adapt, the curriculum, the classes, the songs. We translated songs and did a lot of
yourselves.
things. Yes, to be able to serve in Armenia.
So, Millie, you and your family spent nearly 10 years in the former Soviet Union, half in Russia, half in Armenia. Your next move was to another radically different culture. How was it you came to go to Sri Lanka?
Yes, Sri Lanka. When we were in Armenia, there were 4 young men, students, that came from India to study at the State University in Armenia. They have a very good program in medicine, and they had it in Russian and English. So
really?
So many students would come to study in Armenia. It was easier than going to Russia for them, probably cheaper too. So they came to Russia, and there were 4 of them, and they were Adventists. So they came to church. And when they came to church, we got to know them, and we realized they didn't have a family there. So we invited them home for Friday Vespers and Sabbath after church, and they were supporting us in our ministries too. You know how young people attract young people?
Yes.
So
With energy.
With energy. So we would rely on their energy for that.
And they would rely on your food because you need to give
That's
them food.
right. That's right. But they also taught us how to prepare and eat and enjoy Indian food.
Nice.
And we became acquainted with India through them. So in 1998, we received 2 calls. One was to Mozambique to work for ADRA, and the other one was to go to Sri Lanka. By then, our girls were old enough, so we decided, let's just ask the girls and see what they think. And of course, they thought Sri Lanka. It's the closest thing to India that they knew. So I said, yeah, let's go to Sri Lanka. So we decided to go to Sri Lanka because of that.
How old were they at this point?
They were 12 and 14
Right.
when we
That's
moved
a
to Sri
difficult
Lanka.
age to move.
It is.
So for them to be part of that decision, I'm sure that helped too.
It did, yes, because we wanted them to be happy. So we asked them, where do you want? Do you want to go to Mozambique or Sri Lanka? And they said, let's go to Sri Lanka. And I think God is always leading, And when we came to Sri Lanka, again, there was a church to come to. Their language was English. And by then, our girls were homeschooled in English, so they could communicate.
When did you learn English?
Along the way. I learned along the way. See, when we sent the girls to school in Russia, we thought that maybe they should also learn English because we don't know where God is going to take us next.
Right.
So we started working with, it used to be called, now it's called Griggs now, I think.
Yes, it used to be called Home Study
Home
International.
Study International, thank you. So we started with them back when they were called Home Study International, and their curriculum, I helped my girls through all that curriculum, and I learned along the way.
I see.
And I'm still learning.
And the 4 Indian...
and the 4 Indian, yes,
would have
and the 4
helped as well.
Indian, young men
Right.
that were with us, they also taught us, yes.
What were you doing in terms of a job in Sri Lanka?
In Sri Lanka, I joined ADRA. I worked as a communications director there.
Woohoo.
Yes, but just then. For 2 years. I enjoyed that very much. I was taking pictures of the projects and writing small articles and sharing it with the network.
Nice.
And we serve the church again. We've always served the church wherever we go. We're part of the youth ministries and children's ministries. But that's what I did. I supported my husband with ADRA and the church.
What did he do?
He was the director, the ADRA director for
I see.
Sri Lanka.
Okay.
Yes.
And
Okay.
what was it like living and working in Sri Lanka?
Sri Lanka, it's a beautiful place. It's a beautiful island. They call it the land of smiles. People are very pleasant. And I think also the fact that they have so many ethnicities and religions in Sri Lanka. You have
Even though it's an island, it's very
diverse.
Very diverse.
Very diverse. You have the Sri Lankans, the Buddhists. You have also Sri Lankans that are Hindus. They come
Right.
from the Tamil. The Tamils they are Hindus. Then we have the Sri Lankan Malays and Moors. They follow Islam. And then you have the Sri Lankan Dutch. They call themselves the Burghers, and they're Christians. So you have all these religions in Sri Lanka, and that creates a sense of a diverse community in Sri Lanka, and I think that's why they are very tolerant and they're very pleasant. The problem became for us when all these religions have their holidays. And in the office, in the ADRA office, we had representation of each one of these major religions. So in a month, you would have 6, 7 holidays.
Wow.
And that was challenging for my husband, so big. But
Sounds good.
yes, exactly. But the beauty of it, though, was every morning we got together for worship, and all of them would come together, and they would take, sometimes the Buddhists would take a part in worship, and they would bring some inspirational talk, and at the end we would have prayer, and sometimes it was the Muslims' turn, and sometimes the Christians. So that created a very nice atmosphere in the office. I really liked Sri Lanka. It was a nice place to be. Our girls went to school there, to the international school. So we also learned a lot while being in Sri Lanka.
So you stayed there for a couple of years,
Yes,
and then came the call to Mozambique. Finally, you made it to Mozambique.
exactly.
Tell us about that.
Yes, God had not forgotten that He was inviting us to Mozambique since 2008. So in 2012, we went to work in Mozambique, but this time we were not working as official missionaries of the church. And what I mean by that is we were not ISCs, what we called International Service Employees. My husband was working for an organization called Save the Children International.
Right.
It's
One
based
of the biggest
in the
NGOs.
It's based in the UK. And when I was there with my free time, I finished a master's degree in international development with Andrews University. And I also worked for an organization that was doing microcredit with groups of women.
Right.
And that allowed me to get to know the society of Mozambique, of Nampula was the region where we were living. I would participate with them in focus groups, visit them in their homes. I would enjoy with them, their food. They would talk to me. It was very, very interesting for us. So I got to know the culture very well through that job in Mozambique. We were there 5 years also.
Wow.
And again, serving the church. Even though we were not official, missionaries, we were missionaries because we were serving just as we had served before. We served with the mission. We helped with pastors with their meetings. We had a children's choir. We had a youth group. We sang on national TV with our little choir, and the kids were so, they were so proud, and I was proud of them. So I learned then that mission is really something that you carry within you. You are a missionary, whatever you are.
From Mexico to Russia, Russia to Armenia, Armenia to Sri Lanka, and then to Mozambique. Mozambique is a far cry even from Sri Lanka because it's one of the poorest countries in the world. How did your family adapt to that, let's say, lower quality of life perhaps, or however you want to define it?
Yes.
It's a very poor country.
Yes.
How did that go?
I'm glad we were called to Mozambique at the ages my girls were in, because they were able to see the difference, from one place to the other. It changed our lives living in Mozambique, seeing the poverty, just firsthand. People there die very, very young. In my husband's office, I remember him coming to home almost every week. Somebody was dying, either somebody from the office or somebody related to someone in the office. And they would die, at 40, 43, 30, young people dying because of illnesses. Sometimes the quality of the healthcare was not the best. The projects that my husband attended were education and nutrition projects. So we would go to villages and see kids, malnourished toddlers, and that changes you. That changes you forever. I remember one time I saw a girl. She was carrying a bucket in her head, and there was a hole in the bucket.
Oh.
And the water was dripping, and she was holding a cup. She was holding a cup while walking with this bucket on her head. She was going probably home, she was taking the water. But she was holding the cup so nothing would go to waste of that precious water. So I looked at her, I got my camera, and in that moment she turned to me, and I got her face, and I've never forgotten that face, of this girl. So Mozambique changed me in many, many ways. We had small ministries there that our family in Mexico supported. We would go to villages and buy baskets of food or school supplies. Sometimes we would buy crutches for people that couldn't walk, and we would find them in the city. We'd just give them these crutches. So this was something that changed us. It changed us forever. We have seen poverty firsthand. Yes, and suffering.
They speak Portuguese there. Did you learn Portuguese too?
Yes, yes.
You were collecting one language after the next. How
yes,
formidable.
and it wasn't hard for me speaking Spanish to learn Portuguese, although their Portuguese is, of course, it's Portuguese from Portugal, and it's also African Portuguese. So you could say I speak Portuguese from Mozambique. Yes, it was.
Millie, you and your husband raised 2 children as missionaries' kids?
Yes.
Or third culture kids? How was it for your children to grow up with parents who were missionaries?
In their case, 4th, 5th, 6th culture kids.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. It was challenging. The first time I realized the effect of the decision we had taken was when my daughter was 4 years old, when we had just arrived in Russia. Probably 2 months we were there. And she was taking a bath, and I saw she was very quiet. She was sitting in the, in the tub with all this water, and she was just thinking. And I said, "What are you thinking of?" And she said, "Why did we come to Russia?" And I said, "Well, we came to Russia because Daddy was called to work here in Russia." And her answer was, "Well, if Daddy was called, why didn't we stay back home?" And that's when it hit me that she needed to be part of this call. It was not Daddy's call, it was our family's call. So from that time, we decided to always include them in whatever it was we were doing and explain to them that God had called them to do this. And as they grew up, we tried to involve them in ministry so they would feel part of ministry. And of course, we realized there were some things they missed from their home country, but also there were some other things they gained. And language, for example, is something they gained, right? They speak 4 languages fluently.
They still
And
speak Russian?
They speak Russian, yes, without an accent. If you see them, you wouldn't believe they're not Russian. They understand Armenian. So all this is a gain, but the loss is, of course, moving from one place to another.
Yeah.
Yes, it's always difficult for kids, especially for teenagers, that they form their self-image from their peers around them, and when they're moving so much, and when the peers are different from what they are.
It's hard to belong to a culture that you just moved into.
It's hard. It
Yeah.
takes a while, and then when they're getting used to, then it's time to leave. So it's not easy. It's hard, but I think
Always an outsider.
always
some
an
extent.
outsider. Yes. But we have after a while we have come to the conclusion that talking with them, having them express everything that is inside or what they went through helps tremendously for them to understand.
I can only imagine how they will be able to serve God and the mission, because it's not trivial, Mildred. The experience that they went through.
Yes.
It propelled them to discover who they are, to find a sense of identity much sooner, which means that it wouldn't surprise me if they are a decade ahead of their peers had they stayed in Mexico.
Yes.
And that's the advantage it's a supernatural thing when the Holy Spirit takes you through a series of journeys that transform you.
Yes.
And often we think of learning from the Holy Spirit as a series of propositions. I learned this, this, and this. But you're not transformed by propositions. You are
Yes.
transformed by experiences.
That's right.
And they were exposed to those experiences, much like you had with your parents moving and so on and so forth. But now, their ability to serve God will be much greater even than yours and your husband's, which,
I'm sure.
you see these multiple generations of God's servants in whatever capacity they decide to serve.
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm sure they're equipped for that. Yes.
Yeah.
All these years. Yes.
So you've left Mozambique when your husband was called to serve the General Conference. Tell me more about that transition and eventually how you were called to the Institute of World Mission.
Yes. In 2017, after 5 years of being in Mozambique, the project where my husband was working, they work by projects. There was this huge project that was on for 5 years, and at the end of it, they had to either extend or close the project. And he said, I don't want to, if they extend it, I don't know for how long. And he didn't, having our girls in college, we didn't want to take the risk. So he said, let's just look for another job. And he found a place here in ADRA International, and he got accepted, and that's when we came to work here at the church's headquarters. I didn't have a job, so at the beginning I started looking, where I would work, and I started working in secretariat. And I think what called me from that job was the fact that I was very much in tune with secretarial office in the church. My father had been a secretary of the church, so
Yes,
I
you
knew the
mentioned.
processes. I knew, so I said, I think I can do this. And I worked in secretariat for 1 year, and when I was, the first days that I started working here, somebody gave me a tour of the building. And they showed me the Institute of World Mission. Now, this is something I haven't told anyone. I'm going to tell you.
Exclusive here. We'll keep it to ourselves.
When I was there, I saw that the place, and I told the person, I said, I would like to work here. I would just love to work here training missionaries, just because of the experience that I had. I said, I would love to work here. I mentioned it, not knowing that year and a half later, I would start working there.
Sometimes I think the Holy Spirit chuckles in those
I
situations.
think so. Yes.
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 And what did you initially do for the Institute of World Mission, Millie?
When I started working with the Institute, I was the teen teacher. So I was pretty much teaching the teenagers what I had taught my daughters
Right.
all those years.
That's a very special role. The role of IWM is to train missionaries, but I think it's often forgotten. Children go as missionaries as well as their parents, so we've tried to emphasize that when we've told stories.
Yes.
How did you help to prepare young children and teenagers to go to a different culture?
Yes. What we try to do at the Institute of World Mission, the first thing we do is to talk to them about the call and how they are part of this call. Because you're right, many times as parents, we think of them, okay, they're young, maybe they don't understand, and we just move and bring them along. But the kids, they need to understand, they need to know that God is calling the whole family. So we start with that. We start with having them understand that they are part of the call and they belong to this missionary group just as their parents do. And then, of course, we help them understand what it means to transition. All the things that they're going to face. They're going to have to leave friends behind. They're going to have to leave maybe pets or toys, favorite places behind.
Yep.
And they're going to have to go to a new place where they probably won't understand the language. They will have new friends, or maybe sometimes there won't be many friends, but all these things, we help them internalize what they're going to face, and at the same time reflect on the experiences that they are having while they transition, and make them normal. They also need to understand that there's other kids that are like them, that have gone through to the mission field, and then they have come back. And of course, we always tell them the story about the children of Jay and Andrews, how they went with their father.
The very first missionaries.
Very
yeah.
first missionaries.
And
yes.
helped a lot.
And helped a lot, and they were so important for
Yeah.
the church.
Yeah.
So that's what we try to do with the kids. We tell them, you are as important as your father is for this church. And you can do great things just like the children of Jay and Andrews did.
Beautiful.
How do teenagers respond when you do this training, Millie?
With teenagers, and I love working with teenagers, for them it's all about the friends around them, okay? So when we tell them about the purpose of the missionary call, of course they understand, they know that, but it is when they meet other teens that are going through the same experience.
In the institute.
In the institute.
Right.
That they say, oh, okay, so then it is possible. Also, then it does make sense. And they get to hear the experiences of the rest of the teens and how they are also participating, and they get encouraged, they get encouraged from hearing these stories, and they become part of a bigger family. And we all, of course, try to also make the parents aware of the needs of teenagers at that age, all the things that they're going through, not just changes in from one place to another, but also there's biological changes, and there's so many things that you need to be aware of and attentive to in order to support them the best way. So for them, it's just being part of a big family, and the church's family.
Do they stay in touch with each other?
They do, yes. And we try to every 5 years when we have the general conference session, we have a missionary lounge, and we have a missionary kid pizza dinners, and they all come and we play, and that's when they get to see each other, and they know that it's normal. There's other kids like them.
Yeah.
Mildred Castillo, thank you so much for all the years of service that you have dedicated to God, and now preparing more missionaries to do the same.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks so much for joining us again on Mission 150, which tells the story of the 150 years of Adventist mission to the world.
Please keep watching on the Seventh-day Adventist Church's YouTube channel, on Adventist Review TV, or listening on your favorite podcast platform.
To know more about the Adventist mission today, go to adventistmission.org. That's adventistmission.org.
And for opportunities for service today, go to vividfaith.com.
Join us each episode to learn, to be challenged, and to be inspired to become part of the mission of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.